Before we start, please can I remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed and the recording archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, please use the raise hand function to alert me that you would like to speak. I will indicate when it is your turn to speak, so please then select the request to speak button, which will allow you to come on screen. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. The chat function should only be used to highlight any technical issues and to get the attention of myself or a Democratic Services officers. Please ensure your mobile phone, if you have one, is switched off or to silent. Thank you. First item on the agenda, please. Apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chair. All members are present.
Thank you. I think just to note that our colleagues from Wales Audit Office or Audit Wales won't be with us this evening, given that there's no audit reports on the agenda. Item 2 of the agenda is minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of September 2024 for correctness only. Someone move. Thanks, Councillor Hooper. Seconder, Councillor Good. John, anyone against? No, thank you. Item 3 of the agenda, to receive declaration of interest and nature of such interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. There are none. Item 4 on the agenda then is the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguards Team annual update. The referral which has come to us from the Healthy Living and Social Care Scrutiny Committee of the 8th of October 2024. And I think that's over to Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Joining me tonight is Natasha James, who's the Operational Manager for Safeguarding Service Outcomes, and she'll be presenting the annual update in respect of the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguards team tonight.
Thank you.
Hello, Natasha. Are you there, please? Can you come on screen, Natasha?
Oh.
There we go.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha James. I'm the Operation Manager for Safeguarding. And as was referenced just now, this was referred from the Healthy Living and Social Care Scrutiny Committee from the 8th of October. So the report was presented, and that report went through the activity and overview of things that had taken place within the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguards team during 23-24. So the report itself outlines some of the funding, the activities, some of the funding arrangements that are in place. It takes through some of the numbers of applications that we've received, how we've responded to some changes from an operational perspective within the team, and then goes into information in relation to some of the data. So the team itself is a tri-party funded arrangement between the Vale, Cardiff Council and the Health Board. So I'm sure that people have had a chance to look at the report and the data that's included. So I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you for that, Natasha. Are there any questions from members? Oh, no any indication for questions. I've got a couple of... Oh, Councillor Prothero.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to ask you quickly. I can see that a decision was made, I'm assuming by Westminster Government, to not progress to the Liberty safeguards. And at that point, we were also getting additional money to prepare us for this big change, I'm guessing. And I just wanted to ask you quickly, is that the reason why, when we looked at the backlog and the figures of backlogs, that you had that huge change from 2021 and 2022? Because you went from 322 to 98 in terms of cases in the backlog. Was that because of that extra money that they gave us to prepare for the changes?
Yeah, so
right.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So the decision to progress the change in legislation code of practice, that was put on indefinite hold, but we have continued to receive additional funding from Welsh Government despite that having been put on indefinite hold. So that has allowed us to really concentrate on that backlog and make a significant positive impact on that. So yes.
Which is excellent. Do we know why it's been postponed indefinitely?
I think changing political leadership has happened. Okay. I think there's also this is a personal opinion. I think is potentially that there's other changes that happened to the Medical Capacity Act that were happening, and I think that then that this got put on a kind of, not that it's not a priority, because it absolutely is, but I think there were other things that took precedence really and priority that needed to be addressed. Okay. I think and this question came up previously, is some of the areas that would have created efficiency and would have helped individuals who this application and these applications applied to. We are taking that forward in terms of lobbying and making some changes that we can make irrespective of the legislative changes. So some of those things are happening, and there are working groups across Wales and with Welsh Government to look at that. So we're doing what we can really, despite that not changing.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Prothero. Are there any other questions? I've just got a couple, Natasha. In paragraph 5.3 of the report, it says that the team manager was appointed in the beginning of 2024. And in paragraph 2.1, it says that the team manager was appointed mid-2024. Which is it? Has the team manager now been appointed? Because obviously there was a slippage there.
Yeah, she was. I'm really sorry about that. Good spot. She was actually appointed in March 2024, so the 18th of March 24.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. The other question I've got come to funding, really. Obviously, paragraph 2.6 says that Welsh Government agreed ongoing funding for 23. Should be 24, not 34, but there we are. And it says that further funding will be available. Has the council received that funding, and if so, how much?
Yeah, so 23-24 we received in total 159,657. That was split between. There was a proportion of that, so 47,000 was in relation to the work we do with advocacy, so our RPR appointments, and then 111,000 of that was in relation to support the backlog area and ongoing development work.
What's the funding for 24-25?
It's the same funding for 24-25.
Okay, thanks. And that then leads me on to the question around the sort of tripartite agreement we've got with Cardiff Council and Cardiff and the Vale Health Board. Apart from the obviously 100 and whatever it is, £59,000, what contribution do the other parties pay into this agreement?
Okay, so for the actual day-to-day operation of the team and the work associated, it's on a percentage split. So Cardiff Council is a 40.74%, the Vale are 14.65%, and the Health Board are 44.61%. So all of the costs of running the team and a split in that way. And then there are additional exact costs that get recharged to each party. So there are costs associated with Section 12 doctors. There are costs associated with our RPR service that are directly billed, if you like, to each of the parties. And then separately to that, there is an agreed amount that Cardiff have committed to for a backlog project. So they will commit to X amount of money throughout the year, and we will undertake a number of assessments that equate to that amount of money, and the same for the Health Board.
That's lovely. And does that get reviewed annually, or is it set per annum?
it's set. It's not reviewed annually. We do review it. We review it all of the time. But they what we try to do is the output reflects the amount that is split.
Yeah.
It's always a challenge. We continue to push for, if you would like more, resource, or you want to create more capacity, then we have to consider what the percentage splits are. But equally, we all have committed. Obviously, last year we created a team manager post, which has been really critical in supporting the efficiency changes in the system. So yes, it's a continued kind of overview of that.
That's okay. No, that's lovely. I think the concern I've got is that if you were to lose the Welsh Government funding, then I assume the numbers would start to rise again, because £159,000 is quite a lot of money coming into the system. And given that, the Health Board, I think, and Cardiff Council's numbers are far above the Vale's numbers, it would have a significant strain on this council. So has there been any indication for 25, 26 yet, or none?
None as yet.
Okay.
None as yet.
And does that come out normally in sort of December when the settlement figure comes out?
Generally it's December, January, but they will I can't remember the exact date, but I can find that.
No, I don't need to know the date. I think we just need to keep an eye on this in regards to if the funding is cut, because in a performance regime, this would have a significant impact on your team. Because again, it's great to see, as Councillor Prothero said, the numbers come down in 2019, 2020, 21 from 392 to 322, and then we got down to 98, 72 and 51 now, which is still 10% of the figures. But without the additional funding, I would have thought we'd see that starting to rise again, unless substantial additional contribution was made by the requisite parties to the agreement.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Lovely. Thank you for that. On that basis, are there any other questions? Are there any comments? No, we see the contents report. Obviously, it's been referred to us for our consideration. I think committee notes the contents of the report, but on the basis that we also keep an eye on the financial strain it may have on the authority if the Welsh Government funding is cut. Someone prepared to move, please, that? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Seconded, Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Thank you, Natasha and Ian, for giving up your time this evening. You can stay and listen if you want. Otherwise, you can be released. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Item 5 then on the agenda is the final draft Field Morgan annual self-assessment report. Obviously, it went to Cabinet on the 10th of October 2024. Tom?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, committee. Yeah, thanks for taking the reference from Cabinet on this item. And that's on conclusion of the consultation process around the annual self-assessment. The report that you've got referred to this evening, Chair, sets out in the background the context of the annual self-assessment and the performance requirements of the Act. And that self-assessment comprises reaching 3 main judgments: an assessment of performance against the annual delivery plan, an assessment of the Council's use of resources, and finally an assessment of the effectiveness of the Council's governance, risk management and internal controls through an annual governance statement, which your committee has considered separately. This stage of the process is the updated draft, the final draft of the annual self-assessment. It's being referred to your committee this evening following that engagement and later consultation process. As a result of the engagement and consultation process, no changes to the overall judgments have been required, but a number of recommendations, findings and updates have been made in response to the consultation and engagement report. And I think what's presented to your committee this evening is a much stronger, it's a strengthened and more robust report as a result of that process. There are a couple of appendices. The first, at Appendix A, provides the updated annual self-assessment report. Changes that have been made to the annual self-assessment as a result of the engagement and consultation work are highlighted in red text throughout the report for ease of identification. The engagement and consultation process that's been followed since kind of mid-summer is described in the content of the report from paragraph 2.14. There's also a specific consultation report, that's Appendix B to your papers, which are at page 137 of the online pack. As we discussed at the committee last month, paragraph 218 refers to the role and considerations of this committee. You've got a statutory part of the process at this stage in reviewing the final draft. And at the meeting on the 23rd of September, 13 recommendations were made by this committee for Cabinet's consideration. They considered them on the 10th of October. 5 of those 13 are for us to progress for the next year's report. So the report has been amended based on the 8 recommendations that this committee made. And you can find those at page 148 of the online pack. And what that does is set out the recommendation of this committee and then what has been done in response to amend the report. The recommendations that your committee chair made were around including more narrative in relation to the council's procurement judgment, more narrative in relation to the council's engagement activity judgment, making sure we indicate the actual number of people who'd responded to online polls or social media polls rather than just percentages, increased narrative in relation to the issues around Oracle Fusion, that the commentary in relation to levelling up and transforming towns funding should be double checked for its accuracy, that definitions for each rating used within the report should be incorporated in the report itself, not as a separate hyperlink. Where percentages are used as a figure, that we should also include the actual number. And then finally, the importance of a public summary and infographics to aid understanding and communication. Really helpfully, just before the meeting started, Councillor Hooper pointed out to me that on page 3 there is still one erroneous word in terms of the reference to the Transforming Towns funding, and that shouldn't allude to Barry Waterfront. It should be Barry as a whole, and I've already asked the team to make sure that that's updated. So thank you for pointing it out. With the exception of that, all of the recommendations that your committee made to Cabinet were considered by Cabinet at their meeting and have been responded to positively. They've been accepted. So the point in the process that we're at now, Chair, is that this is being presented as a final draft for your committee's consideration. That's in line with your statutory role under Part 6 of the Act. Upon consideration for you to refer any comments that you may have back to Cabinet for their consideration on the 7th of November. If your committee doesn't have any further comments on the report would be referred directly to Council, which will happen on the 2nd of December. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tom. Questions? Are there any questions from anyone? No, I've just got a quick question. This is semantics now, Tom. Okay. So we've got 5 which have been pushed off to next year and 8 which are this year. So is the position that 5 were not accepted for this year and 8 were accepted for this year, given that presumably the amendments can't be made to the 5, because obviously reading the narratives, you know, in regards to percentages and lots of the data you haven't got and the directorates haven't got. So obviously it's not accepted this year, but it'll have to be accepted next year, if you see what I mean. Or is it the Cabinet have accepted all 13, but with that proviso that they be pushed off, 5 be pushed off the next year? I'm sorry to say that, but it just makes, you know,
Just for absolute clarity, Cabinet endorsed all of the comments of this committee. The ones that have been, as you put it, Chair, pushed off for next year, in discussion at committee in September, I think it was recognised that some of those comments actually just would be better responded to when we were looking at drafting the next year's report. They alluded to work around, including more information around the work of the member champions, looking at how we could streamline some of the performance work, and it was really pleasing to meet with chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny committees and group leaders last week, where we were discussing how we could potentially do that, and then making sure that we also reflected some of the outstanding or exception-based actions from the annual delivery plan within the report. So no, Cabinet accepted them all. It's just that they'll be actioned for next year. And what I've asked the team to do is put a little bit into the section in terms of how we're going to be continuing to review this process. And those things are alluded to there. So they'll also remain on our work plan internally within that group.
That's the clarity I think we need, because obviously some of them would have been, I can understand from the narrative, very difficult to do. Otherwise, we'd be holding this thing up for months, possibly. So, it's pleasing that Cabinet's accepted them all, and that they see we're playing a very positive part in looking at this document. So, thank you for that, Tom. If there are no other questions, any comments? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. It's pleasing that the recommendations have all been pushed through. It's also good to see other scrutiny committees engaging positively with the process. And I just say that in the first two, Healthy Living and Social Care Scrutiny Committee and Homes and Safe Communities, there were there seems to be a lot less interaction with those two committees to the report. And given this is considered an important report for this council, I just wonder, is there anything that officers need to do to encourage members to respond, particularly given those areas are both things that have real concern for residents of the Vale? Thank you.
Is that a comment or a question? It's a question, really.
It is really, isn't it?
Tom, I'll have Councillor Hooper to ask that question, and you can respond.
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Hooper. Absolutely, we're always learning on how best to involve elected members in this process. It's really useful that we have a briefing for all elected members prior to the formal scrutiny cycle. I think that gives people an opportunity to understand what's in the report and potential lines of inquiry that they might want to test out. We also look to try and support those committee meetings with a presentation. I think your question prompted me to think that we've in the past used a kind of generic presentation, and then elected members perhaps have had to look at identifying particular issues that their committee might be specifically interested in. Perhaps there's an opportunity for us to road test the idea of working with either the committee or just the committee chair and vice chair, perhaps, that ahead of that meeting that we identify some of the specific topics that they might like to pick out. Because, yeah, absolutely, it's this year the engagement in the draft process has been more involved than it has been in the past, which is really pleasing to see, but yeah, always something we want to do more of.
Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Chair. I think there is much to be pleased about. I would like to particularly highlight for next year, as it does pertain to the whole document perhaps being changed, but I think including what you called them council challenges as a key part of the document and the lessons learned from that. I think that's a really positive development. I'm very glad that comment has been taken on board from corporate performance, but also from here as well. I think most of the I think every single change I can agree with and definitely endorse here. There's just a few things that I think weren't fully taken on board from last time, which I will reiterate that I think could be positive changes. Firstly, I think the engagement on social media, the social media polls, now you've got the full numbers in there, it's not statistically relevant. I think it was worth a go to try as a form of engagement, but to include polls which were, you know, in the teens in some cases as part of the document is probably not necessary and bulks out the document more than it needs to. I think that the inclusion of the two different tables when it came to how our budget is spent is good. You don't need to have one on a hyperlink, though. Both within the document is perfectly fine. There's no point to have a hyperlink to a one-page document. And these are fantastic summaries for the public to see how their council tax money is being spent, and it needs to be publicised as much as possible. So I'm really glad to see that. It's really positive. Just, you know, that is the kind of thing I want more of, rather than extremely long performance summaries, which drag on. Are very important, but drag on and is difficult for the public to read. The final thing I would say is the response from Surrey Community Council gives a good idea of how the public reads a document like this. And I think that having a quick look at it, it provides an insight into how people are reading it and looking for hypocrisies and feeling that they have to drag through an extremely long document to get to the information that they want. That is exactly the kind of thing that we want to prevent. Now, obviously, this is much shorter than previously. It is better. We're going to make it better. But this is the importance of having short documents that aren't, you know, buried in civil service speak, that people can easily access, easily read, so that we're as transparent and open as an organisation as possible. And the further we can get towards that, the better. So on the whole, very good changes. There's just a few things which I think definitely can still be changed for next year that I didn't see specifically mentioned. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Goodjohn. Are there any other comments? No? Okay, I think the recommendation then, Tom, in reality, is obviously we note the contents report. However, we'll just make the further comments to Cabinet in respect of the issues raised by Councillor Goodjohn in relation to the use of social media. And I think these are lessons learned, really, aren't they? Social media, the issue around budgets, the budget tables and, you know, learning lessons from that. I don't think these are major issues. The issue around some of the responses from town councils, presumably. And the third one is that there's an easy to read, open, transparent, English language, plain language, friendly document, you know, which is available for members of the public. And hopefully that can be referred to Cabinet on the 7th of November. I don't think we need a formal response back again. But if those could, and I'm sure Councillor Goodjohn can make them in council in any event. So if they could be picked up.
Yes, certainly, and thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And absolutely, I'd agree. We want to continue to promote as much of that engagement work through social media as we can do. It is interesting that your feedback about that budget table, because indeed other elected members have suggested it being a hyperlink. But I think the essence of what you're saying in terms of making that information available to people is really important. And I just wanted to give some assurance to committee that I know this is a long report. It needs to do lots of things that as elected members and senior staff we really need to cover off. But I understand it's, you know, over 100 pages for members of the public. That's why there was a 7-page public summary that I made sure, and I should have mentioned it in my opening remarks, as a result of the feedback from your committee last year. So we made sure that was brought forward in the process. But just to give you assurance that we haven't been expecting the public to read over 100 pages, that pleasure just sits with yourselves as councillors. Thank you.
Okay, you happy with that, Councillor Goodjohn? Okay, someone prepared to move then that we note with those comments. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Seconder, Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Item 6 is the Corporate Risk Register Q2 update. Tom, I assume again?
Thanks very much, Chair. So yeah, this is the Corporate Risk Register as at Q2. Very briefly, in terms of introducing it, it's a report, I guess, that has got two main sections. One, it gives you an update following your consideration during the summer of the new risks to go on the register and the risk management policy. And then secondly, it presents the register for your committee's consideration as at the end of Q2. So back in July, we brought a report to Governance and Audit Committee presenting a new set of proposed corporate risks alongside a new risk management strategy. The comments, it was a really, really useful part of the process to bring it to your committee at that stage, and we referred those comments to Cabinet in September, and their response made a number of resolutions requesting further work to be done in line with committee's views. So just to make it clear that as a result of those deliberations, Cabinet requested that we explored all of the issues that you raised as a committee. Those are outlined in Appendix B to the report that you've got this evening. They centred around both the register and the strategy. So the updates that have been made in response are highlighted in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.4 of the covering report. Just to give you a quick update, SLT and the Strategic Insight Board further moderated the risks at committee's request. We've confirmed the risk scoring, and that reflected the comments for further consideration by the committee. We had some discussion around some of the terminology that was used in the report, so we've made some changes to the introductory section of the risk strategy. We also had a discussion around the use of the word enterprising in relation to risk appetite. We've gone back to the UK government's risk guidance manual, and the terminology that's used there is eager rather than enterprising. So we've adopted eager in its place. Your committee also asked us to look at procurement and whether that ought to be a standalone risk. It's been scoped as Cabinet requested, and at the current time considered it to be appropriate to retain it within the financial resources risk, but with a watching brief. And your committee also asked for social services risks to be reviewed. Members will be aware that we consolidated a number of them. And I think it was Councillor Goodjohn's comments looking at, actually, has this just become too big a risk or too wide ranging? So we've had a look at that, and we've identified that safeguarding ought to be a risk in its own right. So that's now on the register as a distinct risk. There were some other points that were raised by committee, and they're all outlined in Appendix B, but I wanted to bring those as the major ones. So based on the moderated risks and the 12 risks that then ensued, we've got Appendix A, which is your usual updated risk summary document. That's based on completely reworked risk management templates. For brevity, we don't include those within the overall pack, but they are referenced in background papers if elected members want to see more detail, and obviously we want to make sure that the process is as transparent as we can be. So that shows you the workings, if you like, behind the register. So there are currently 12 corporate risks on the register, 6 scoring high, 3 medium high, and 3 risks are scoring medium. There are 3 risks on the register that we are forecasting to increase over time, relating to climate change and the nature emergency, social care demand and capacity, as well as physical assets. There's 1 risk that is forecast to diminish over time, and that relates to digital. All of the other risks are forecast to remain static on the register. So that's just a really brief overview since you considered the item in July.
Thank you for that again, Tom. Any questions? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. Just 2 things. Delivery of major regeneration projects is considered to be static at the moment. I'm just wondering whether that should reflect the budget that's coming up in 2 weeks' time, because clearly if the budget's changed for the major projects that affect Barry, then that would be a risk increasing to, well, it would change 2 of the major projects massively. And the second thing, just on climate change and nature emergency, I'm just interested in understanding the impact score, not having somewhere else to go, i.e. that we think there's, because that's the only thing that's stopping it from being catastrophic. So I'd be interested in understanding the SLT's view on that and others. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Absolutely, the discussion we had at leadership team was in terms of the major projects delivery. We were discussing the forthcoming budget, and it was a decision that we would keep it on that sort of standard trajectory for the time being, and obviously monitor what happens a week on Wednesday, because as you say, if that funding is not forthcoming, then those projects that project wouldn't be funded. But at the current time, as at the end of Q2, there was more certainty. So it's almost one of those kind of timing of a document aspects, if you like, which is just what's reflecting there. In terms of the climate change and nature emergency risk, along with all of the risks, some of the comments that were made at committee over the last few cycles of us bringing the risk register were relating to, are these risks to the organisation, or are they the risk associated with the issue that is being managed? And climate change was an interesting one to review from that perspective, so that by looking at redefining the risks and making them what is the risk to the organisation, that's what's led to that 12, but looking at that forecasting to increase over time, because in effect it's the risk of us not meeting that 2030 target and us not then contributing to the 2050 target. So at the moment, the controls that we've got in place are very limited in terms of being able to do those, for all the reasons that the report sets out in terms of timing, financial resources, etc. And that's the reason for it remaining as at that score currently. But for your assurance, we take that regularly as an individual risk to the Project Zero board, and they're very clear that the Governance and Audit Committee want us to keep a particularly close eye on that one.
Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, I just wanted to come back in because it was a couple of months ago, I think, that I raised the fact that it was Welsh Government that had advised all local authorities to put procurement reform on our risk register. And the reason why they advised us all to do so was because of the risks to us as an authority, with all of the changes, with the changes of legislation, with the changes of procedures and process, the many, many hours of training that will be required for anyone who touches procurement. And that's why they said for us to do it as an individual subject, to keep that eye on it and to make sure that everything that needed to be done was done. So I appreciate that a decision's been made to just keep it with finance, but I just wanted to raise it again because it was advice from Welsh Government that we should do it. But thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero, and absolutely, we just to give some reassurance, we have put within the financial resources risk a reference to failure to meet the requirements of the Procurement Act and the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Wales Act, and making it very clear that there's no appetite to fail to meet the political and legislative requirements specifically within the register. So whilst it's not a risk in of itself, it is an intrinsic part of that risk and forms part of the monitoring framework for it as well. So thank you for raising it again with us.
Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tom, for the reports. Just two quick questions from me. I'm afraid one is about procurement again. One of the ways you can describe risk is a sort of uncertainty. And it certainly raised questions with me that the analysis you've given in Appendix B as to why procurement wasn't included standalone included that there were adequate controls in place, including a comprehensive contracts register and forward plan. Yet later on the agenda, we've got a report from internal audit, which specifically states that the contracts register is in place, but now needs to be populated. So that didn't give me comfort. I know that's maybe a specific area. But yeah, there was just a bit of misalignment between those two. So I'm just wondering if you can give me a bit of comfort as to why those two opinions are different. And secondly, more practicalities really, but the risk categories you put a bit later in Appendix B, which were useful just to get an idea of how you use them. Thank you. But I just wanted to get an idea. There was quite a lot that basically all of them, really, with the exception of reputation, have a link through to ability to deliver services and resources. So I just wondered how you distinguish where there is a resource issue, which one of those categories it goes into, because it can't really just go under resources. But I'd just be keen on your view in terms of how you distinguish between those different areas, given resources seems to be so prolific throughout the risk register. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. If I maybe take the second question first, if I can. You're referring to the risk management templates, I think, which accompany each of the risks on the register, and the Council's risk methodology uses 4 different categories of political and legislative risk, resources, as you say, service delivery and well-being, and then finally reputation. And what we do is look at each of the risks on the register through the lens of each of those 4 categories in order to identify the likelihood and impact of the risk occurring. And what that does is allow us to get a holistic view, if you like, of each of the risks. You are right that resources has a particularly pertinent impact on all of the risks currently, but what I would say, I guess, is that those 4 categories are interlinked. So the political and legislative framework that we're working in, so what's actually driving our work, what resources have we got available to us, what impact does that have then on service delivery and well-being for the residents of the Vale of Glamorgan, and then fourthly, how does that impact on the council's reputation in order to manage ourselves as an organisation. And it's considering risk from those 4 perspectives collectively that allows us to reach the overall score. In terms of the first question, I think there is certainly further work to be done on the contract forward plan. We have a mechanism that's well established within the council in terms of of a contract register, which is regularly monitored and reported to the leadership team by legal services, which is what I think this document is referring to, because that's the contracts that are being executed and managed within the legal services department. The work that is referenced then later on in the papers this evening, I think relates to the overall framework of contracts, and that's what the piece of work that Ardell have been doing on our behalf in putting that together. I think it's fair to say that that register is largely populated. There are still some gaps in there, but the procurement reform response that we're looking to deliver in terms of the legislation, which has been slightly delayed, is being managed via an action plan that we understand what the duties and requirements are, and that has some regular monitoring as well. So I know that probably doesn't entirely answer the question, but hopefully gives a bit more context.
Thank you, Tom. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Tom, 2 questions for me, if I could. In terms of the risk register, I think I've asked it before, but given we've had a refresh, are there any on that register you're worried are outside of appetite in any way? We need some remedial actions to bring us back with an appetite. And then secondly, and a bit more pragmatically, I wonder if you could just give me a bit more of a flavour on the risk register for the effectiveness, a control score. I think we've got everything from a 1 to a 4 there, but everything's kind of medium or low. So I just wanted to double check my understanding of how you're scoring those, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. I probably need some further time to give you a really detailed answer in terms of those scores that are outside of risk appetite. I don't have the detailed knowledge of all 12 of the risks, but what I would say is that the ones that are scoring the very highest on the register are the ones where we have obviously got additional cause for concern around, and some of those mean that we're acting outside of our appetite, and certainly speaking for the ones that are on the register within the remit of corporate resources as a directorate, they are either on the edge of our appetite or exceeding them. In terms of the effectiveness of control scores, as you say, they do range from 1 being the lowest, which is showing that in effect the controls that are in place have a very limited impact on reducing the inherent risk of something, and examples there around housing and homelessness, climate change and the nature emergency, for example. So there's an awful lot of activity going on, but actually the impact of that is not reducing the overall risk, because that's inherently very high. Whereas in other instances where we've got strong or stronger mitigations in place, I'm thinking the report makes specific reference to digital, for example, where there's a digital strategy, there's a digital service, there's a program in place to moderate and to deliver against those commitments. Actually, we think the effectiveness of controls in that environment is much stronger. So in terms of reaching those judgments in terms of the effectiveness of controls, it is done as part of defining each of the risks. It's kept under constant review as well as new mitigations become controls, and then that moderation piece is done across the leadership team and the Insight Board. So that's just a bit of background, Matthew, which I hope helps.
Thank you. Chair, if you don't mind, I just want to clarify that second point, and maybe I'm being a bit more basic than Tom thinks I am. If I look at risks 9, 11 and 12, they've all got an effectiveness control score of 4, but it's listed as a medium. And I'm reading on the table before that 4 is a very high controller risk. And I just want to make sure that I'm reading it rightly or wrongly, and whether I should be concerned or whether it's just, I don't know, I'm not reading the stuff in the brackets right.
Sorry, Matthew, and I would never have described you as being more basic by any means, and I think you are right. But if you will give me some time while you're discussing other issues, I'll make sure that I can have a look at it. But I think you're right that the medium that's indicated in the effectiveness of control score within the column on Appendix A has been lifted and should actually be high. I think it's just been copied incorrectly into that column from the residual risk, but let me just double check that I'm certain on that.
Thanks for that, Tom. Are there any other questions? I've just got a couple in regards to some of the risks. The first one is risk reference 7, which is the WICIS system, Tom. Obviously, my understanding is that there's a sort of drop dead date for WICIS, which I think is at March next year, 2025, when it's not going to be supported any longer. And the narrative, obviously, within the report says everything about failure to develop, failure to contract, failure to do this and that. And I'm just wondering what progress there has been made to substantiate that score of 8, given that the time scale is slipping away now, whether any contractual relationships are in place on a regional basis, because I know that the Gwent authorities are working together to get a solution, whether the same's happening within this region. And how far advanced are we to get that replacement package in place so that it doesn't fall over by the due date? That concerns me. That's the first one. The second is in regards to the, I've got some concern about this financial resources risk and lumping it all together. You know, I think I'm fairly supportive of what's been said, that the procurement issue should be split out again and should be looked at again. But the score on financial resources currently is 12. I'm just wondering whether the Cabinet should actually look at increasing that to 16, given that the medium-term financial plan of the authority is showing a significant shortfall of funding for next year. It's in, I haven't got the figure to hand, but it's in millions of pounds. You know, that's not insignificant. And, you know, if the budget stays the same, then it's going to mean significant efficiency savings, or whatever you want to call them, cuts really to service delivery. And whether 8 is actually being or 12, sorry, is being too kind. Actually, it's a real risk for this authority, as it is for every authority. It's not just this authority, every other authority in Wales, that it cannot meet its requirements in moving forward. And again, as we say, yeah, the financial resources cover everything in reality, because if you haven't got enough money, then everything in this list is going to be hit substantially. So I'm just wondering whether, firstly, financial resources should actually be at 16. WICIS should actually be higher than what it is. And whether we actually, subject to what committee says, actually request that Cabinet consider separating out the procurement issues from the financial resources issues to move forward. Because in the back of my mind somewhere, and I hear what you say about the contracts register, but we had some reports, I'm sure, in the last 18 months where there were issues surrounding some of our contracts. I don't know, was it the big food, whatever it is, the big fresh food issues and things like that? So if we've got our fingers on the pulse, then these things should never happen. So I'm just wondering whether Councillor Prothero's point and others' point should actually split it out. Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. In terms of the general discussion around procurement and its recognition on the register, obviously there's been discussion at the last meeting and also at this meeting. If as a committee you were minded to make a recommendation back to Cabinet for some further consideration, I'm sure that they would be open to having that discussion. And what I can do ahead of that is make sure that the scoping work that was undertaken within the finance team is done in a bit more detail, and that would act as a bit of a briefing note to Cabinet, obviously subject to your committee wanting to make that recommendation. In terms of the overall score for the financial resources risk, whether it has or hasn't got the procurement aspect in it, obviously this is at the end of Q2, so there is a timing issue there. We will be taking a refresh of the medium-term financial strategy through the political system now in November, so it does feel timely if, again, your committee were minded to recommend that Cabinet consider maybe the scoring of that. Certainly the direction of travel indicates that we're looking for that one to be increasing. I don't have specific up-to-date information relating to the commissioning process for the WICIS, or the social care record system. I am aware that an urgent item went to Cabinet on the 10th of October relating to social care records system. So what I can do is, if Gareth is happy for me to, I'll make sure that we send that report round to committee members, so you've got a bit more of the background. And if then you want any further information, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll make sure that that's reflected in Q3's risk report, if that's an item that you're particularly interested in.
I think that would be very useful, and I think I don't know whether I'm allowed to do this, but if Cabinet is not prepared to accept that procurement shouldn't be a separate risk on the risk register, whether the leader could come and explain why not.
I'm I'm aware the leader is watching and is usually at this committee, and I'm sure, not wishing to speak for her, but I know she's made contributions to the committee in the past, and I'm sure she'd look forward to doing so in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure, obviously the leader is very, proactive in these matters, and we hope that if it gets referred, we hopefully get a positive response, but we'll wait and see what happens when it comes back to committee. Councillor John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to reiterate what other members of the committee have said in support of your recommendation, Chair. I think what our task and finish group and all of the work that's I've done over the past 2.5 years on the council has shown is that this is an absolutely vital issue. If the recommendations of the task and finish group, as when they come out, are not implemented immediately and dramatic changes don't occur to the procurement system in this council, we will face dramatic cuts. We will face dramatic challenges to Project Zero, our financial resources. This needs to be looked at immediately. I want to, if the head of finance does not believe that this is worthy of a risk on its own, I really question whether this is being taken seriously enough, and I would fully agree with the recommendation. My other comment would be in regards to Project Zero. The consistent disagreement as to the impact on this organisation of failing to meet our carbon targets is worrying, and it is clear from the draft carbon management plan that's recently been released from Cabinet that we are at the moment on track to fail by a significant margin to hit our 2030 target. And I think it is fair to say that the overall opinion in the organisation is that it's not going to happen. Not to say that we're not trying with everything that we have available to us within the limited resources that we have, but it is not on track, and it is not on track by quite a long distance. As such, not meeting our statutory requirements, undermining faith in the political system and also in this council, not meeting our requirements under the Paris Agreement, not meeting the targets required to us by the public sector, by the Welsh Government in our public sector reporting targets, and not to mention the UK government. I think there is dramatic risk to the organisation on a reputational level, on a financial level. Not meeting our carbon targets will also put us dramatically behind competitively with the private sector, and also reduce the amount of potential gains from zero carbon energy, from zero carbon use of innovative technologies in order to streamline and make more efficient the process of this council. So I would just like to state my disagreement with Cabinet, with SLT and with the head of finance on those two issues, and support the chair's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I know most of that was comment, but I just wanted to come back on the issue relating to the head of finance and the scoping of the procurement piece, just for absolute clarity. Whilst that colleague did scope it, the process is that as a leadership team we looked at that, so it's a collective recommendation, of course, and I know that's what you were alluding to. Obviously, we're bringing it at this point in the process in order to allow elected members to consider the issues in the round and to make those recommendations to Cabinet. So, yes, if you're minded to make that recommendation, they'll certainly look. But the rest I know was comment.
Any other comments? No. Okay, we go to the recommendations then. The first recommendation is that we note the SLT's consideration of the revised corporate risk register and the responses to Cabinet's resolution following their consideration of the Governance and Audit Committee referred comments. 2, that we note the Quarter 2 position of the corporate risk, April 24, to March 25, outlining the risk summary report, Annex C. And I think number 3 is that committee recommend that Cabinet should separate the procurement item from the financial resources risk, and it should be a freestanding risk in the corporate risk register, 1, or A. B, that whilst acknowledging the Q2 position, that committee recommends that the scoring of the financial resources risk, the transition from the Welsh Community Care Information System, WCIS risk, and the climate change and nature emergency risk be looked at as a matter of urgency by Cabinet and the SLT. I think that picks it up, hopefully. Okay, someone prepared to move, please. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Seconder, Councillor Hooper. Thank you. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. That's carried. Next item is item 7, the proposal to amend the minimum revenue provision 24-25 policy. Oh, hi, Gemma.
Hello, good evening. Hope you're all well. Okay, minimum revenue provision policy. Okay, as members will be aware, as a council, we borrow to fund our capital programme, which is largely expenditure on assets. A key part of the council's capital funding is our supported borrowing. So in terms of talking about a revised minimum revenue provision policy, we're talking about a minimum revenue provision policy in respect of the council's supported borrowing. And that's the figure varies each year, but in 23-24, that was £3.5 million. So quite a significant amount within our loans pool. So in the context of treasury management, from an accounting perspective, rather than reflecting the costs of our external borrowing, we reflect the minimum revenue provision, which is prudent provision for the loans that we've raised in terms of our capital financing requirements. And we have a number of options as a local authority as to how we calculate what our prudent provision would be each financial year. And we did a big review in 2018 and we commissioned some additional support from Link, who are our treasury management advisors. And some local authorities do a really complex calculation, and we're probably at the more simplistic end of the calculation. So we chose to go with an asset life method. So we sought to match our repayment of our loans, our provision for repayment of loans each year to the life of our assets. And at the time we did the calculation, lots of local authorities were looking at their MRP policy, and some local authorities were making some adjustments that I think some auditors were concerned weren't prudent, and they were unravelling their historical provision. So we were a little concerned at the time that the Ministry for Housing and Communities and subsequently Welsh Government would put a cap on the amount of time that you were able to make provision for repayment of your loans. And so we went with a kind of 40 years, which was slightly on the cautious side of our asset lives. Last year, we did a little bit of benchmarking around what other local authorities were doing, and we identified that a number of Welsh authorities were linking their minimum revenue provision to a life of 50 years, and we decided to do a bit of an internal review, particularly because in recent years, we've made significant contributions to our Sustainable Communities Learning programme from our supported borrowing, and those asset lives are typically around 65 years. So we went back 8 years and reviewed the average asset lives, and we concluded that extending our MRP policy to 50 years would be prudent. The benefit from a budgeting perspective is that would save approximately £615,000 We had earmarked 600,000 as a saving in the 24-25 budget on this basis. So we aren't intending to do any retrospective adjustments, but we would like to amend the 24-25 MRP policy on this basis. And what would follow, should this be approved at committee, would be a revised Treasury Management Strategy, which we're working on at the moment. That revised Treasury Management Strategy would reflect this MRP policy, and it would also reflect the calculations around IFRS 16, which we're working on in year. I think those are the main points I was going to draw out on the report, but I'm happy to take any questions or provide any additional clarification in this area. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma, for that. Are there any questions? Nigel?
Just one quick one from me. When you say a number of other Welsh authorities, how many, please?
Chair, I through you, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was at least 6 that had gone with a 50-year policy for MRP, but there was a real range and a real mix of MRP policies, because obviously as when we shared the information, we were talking about our kind of unsupported borrowing asset lives as well. But I can confirm subsequent following this meeting if that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. Nigel, is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Gemma, 2 very basic questions following with you. On table 3, interested in the rationale of going back 8 years, I guess, and on the figure for 23-24, the 43.14 figure, do you see that as an anomaly, or do you know what's driving that?
So in terms of going back 8 years, that was pragmatism. I think that was more time-based than anything. But we realised that it could be a criticism of our analysis, absolutely. And then in terms of the lower figure, the 43 year figure, obviously it's a real mix of things that we fund from our supported borrowing. So if we make contributions to, for instance, to the to replacement of vehicles or something, for instance, obviously they've got very short lives, and similarly equipment. What can also drive sometimes how we use our supported borrowing is where we have significant grant programmes from Welsh Government where we're required to switch our funding of our capital programmes. So we wouldn't typically fund things with a short life like vehicles from our general capital funding. But when we are required to switch funding due to slippage and things like that, to maximise our supported borrowing, that can happen. So I think as a policy, typically we would tend to use supported borrowing for longer life assets such as buildings.
Does that satisfy Matthew?
I think so. I guess what I was hoping for was a bit more comfort that we thought on 24-25 we foresee our budget will return to the kind of 50-year mark that would support our MRP change, and that there was something that happened in 23-24 that put it as an outlier. I don't know if you can give me that, Gemma, or not sure.
Chair, unfortunately, I can't. I do think it was an outlier because obviously we were at the higher end prior to that for a number of years. I'd have to go away and get a bit more information to come back to you. I would certainly expect us to be back up above 50 years in 24-25.
Thanks, Gemma. Councillor?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Gemma. And following on from Matthew's point on Table 3, I think there's another outlier as well which impacts on this average figure. It's the 2016-2017 figure of 65 years. If you exclude that, you're down to something like 48.6 48.6%, 48.6 years. And I think Matthew's point is really important, because if we don't have comfort over the 43, why should I have comfort over the 65, which is having more of an impact on it? And perhaps the decision to make this change should be considered next year, not this year, when we're confident of that place.
Chair, could I maybe suggest that perhaps it'd be helpful for me to come back with an analysis of 24-25's proposed use of general capital funding, and then perhaps that would help give members a little bit more comfort about whether this is prudent provision. Obviously, it's a really tricky balancing act, isn't it? Because certainly people in 40 years' time wouldn't thank us if the loans that we expect to be repaid and should have been repaid for assets haven't been repaid. And similarly, we're trying to ensure that we don't make savings in 25-26 that we can avoid. So it's a really tricky balancing act, but certainly, you know, I'm happy to go away and do a little bit more analysis and come back to committee either in November or I think we're having an extraordinary meeting in November or maybe in December with some further analysis to support.
Thanks, Gemma. You mentioned analysis of 43 of the 23-24 year. I really appreciate a bit of understanding of the 2016-17, or just exclude it. That seems to be the biggest outlier of the lot.
Okay, Chair, I'd be absolutely happy to go away and do a little bit more analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Gemma. I think given the questioning from Matthew and Councillor Hooper, might I suggest that we defer this item now for further analysis to the evening, I think, Gareth, of the 18th of November. We do have we are likely to have a special meeting to do the statement of accounts. And clearly, given that the reasons for the recommendations here is that you want to incorporate them into a revised Treasury management strategy and the 24-25 MRP policy to be presented to Cabinet in November and full Council in December. Hopefully that will give enough sufficient time, should this committee agree or recommend to Cabinet that they approve the supported borrowing policy. However, I'm also mindful, even if we don't approve it, it's a matter for Cabinet and Council in any event, taking into consideration our comments. So, Gemma, if it doesn't impose on you too much, if you could do an addendum paper to this report picking up the points, all I would suggest is that we do that and bring it to the 18th of November and we defer this matter to the 18th of November if committee's happy with that.
Chair, just to come in, yeah, that's absolutely fine. And I think some of our IFRS 16 calculations are perhaps taking slightly longer than we anticipated. So it's possible that we might not be seeing a revised Treasury management strategy in November as we hoped. It might be slightly later than that. So that's absolutely fine with me in terms of timing. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Super.
Yeah, just picking up on Nigel's question as well, I'd be quite keen to understand the other local authorities' MRP figures as well. So if that could be form part of the analysis, I'd be grateful.
Okay, I think you've got all that, Gemma. So we need the analysis, how many authorities are at 50 years. It would also be interesting to know how many authorities are above 50 years as well, if there are any in Wales. So, you know, that information you've got. And picking up then the other points that Councillor Hooper and Matthew has raised in regards to the outlying figure of 65 and the low figure for this year or last year of 43.14. So I suggest that we defer this to the meeting of the 18th of November for an updated report. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gemma. Item 8 then, Governance and Audit Committee Annual Report 23-24. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. This report is coming back to committee following the draft presentation at the previous Governance and Audit Committee. So we've now taken on board members' comments, Chair's comments, and incorporated them into the final version of your annual report for the Governance and Audit Committee. So the major changes are shown at the appendix, which is Appendix 3, where we've incorporated examples of where your committee has invited in the relevant director or head of service to provide a written update, to provide further assurances that action was being taken to implement the agreed internal audit recommendations or as a result of concerns raised by internal audit. And you can see there's quite a number of those, Chair. And also taking on board the fact that we've now got lay members on board with our Governance and Audit Committee. Members felt it would be appropriate to have some background information about their experience and knowledge. So that's now incorporated in Appendix 5. If I could just refer members to the conclusions, just to reiterate within the report that the committee has complied with its expectations in terms of legislation, Local Government and Elections Act and the measure. Members have demonstrated that they've held senior management to account for making improvements in the governance arrangements and the control environment, and challenged officers and sought clarification and progress reports to obtain assurances throughout the year. Some directors have been invited to committee to provide further assurances. And from the self-assessment that we've undertaken, members feel they have a good or satisfactory level of knowledge and experience of the topics which we cover during the year. At that point, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions, but it is your annual report.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there any questions from members? No? Any comments? No? Okay, you see the recommendations then that...
Sorry, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Nigel. Apologies.
So I think just missed my hand there. So
That's
it's
okay.
Just one question. One thing that's just in the Appendix 5 on my pen picture. I think there's an additional return that just needs to be taken out there in paragraph 2. But my question was regarding 4.4.1. I thought we were going to change the section that said summary reports of finalised audit assignments were reported to the Governance and Audit Committee during the year. I thought we were going to clarify that we didn't see every single audit. But just pick that one up, please.
So, Chair, just trying to find 4.4.1. All right, okay, yes, Chair, I'll make sure that's amended in terms, before it goes into council. I did clarify 4.4.2, but I obviously missed 4.4.1, so apologies.
Thank you for that, Nigel. Okay, we got the recommendation then that subject to the amendment being made at paragraph 4.4.1 that the Governance and Audit Committee endorse the annual report for 23-24 and recommend its referral to full council. Obviously, I need confirmation once Tom gets back as to whether, well, I understand the leader may take it, but just to advise that not as part of the formal recommendation, I can attend if you need me to be there. Okay. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Seconded. Councillor Hooper, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Item 9, Stanwell School project update.
Thank you, Chair. As members will be aware, Internal Audit brought a report to committee regarding Stanwell School and capital project well over a year ago now. I thought it would just be appropriate to bring an update of where we are in terms of that particular report and the issues that were discussed at committee. Members will be aware of the concerns we raised previously. That's been discussed at length by committee, and recommendations were made by this committee to move that position forward. To update committee, the internal auditors have undertaken a regularity audit at the school in October 2023, which resulted in a reasonable assurance opinion. That opinion has been reported into committee, but I felt it would probably be more appropriate to put a bit more meat on the bone for your information to update members. So the areas we covered as part of that regularity audit are shown at 2.4, and we tested the system against those expected controls to make sure that things were working within that school following the work that was undertaken as a result of the concerns raised previously. It was noticed that the school at the time had a 3-year recovery plan for its deficit budget, and that was being monitored regularly by the governing body and the finance committee. Regarding the capital project and the previous issues identified, unfortunately they were not and could not be followed up as no further capital projects were undertaken at the time of the actual audit. But the acting head teacher did provide assurances that if such projects were considered, he would ensure all proper processes and they would be in place and there would be compliance with the expected financial and procurement procedures for the school, and all local authority officers would be contacted and involved. The head teacher in post during the time we identified the issues left the authority in 2023, and the acting head teacher was appointed to the role of head teacher on a permanent basis in 2024. School moved from foundation school to community school and came back into the control of the local authority. And to add to that, the overspend has significantly reduced by the end of April 2024. With regards to the confidential report that was issued back to the school, to the acting head teacher and the chair of governors, they agreed with all the recommendations and took appropriate action where feasible. The matter was also referred on to an external organisation for further consideration, which is still ongoing. So that's the update for your committee chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any questions? Matthew?
Thanks for the update, Andrew. I guess one question. The reasonable assurance position, I was a bit surprised when I read the follow-up that said that because there was no further capital project, you couldn't verify or evidence that the new controls would have been operating effectively. Now, I appreciate you being given some assurances that they would, but I just wanted your kind of view on how you reconcile that reasonable assurance versus the fact that you weren't able to really test the robustness of those controls.
Okay, thank you. As it says in 2.4, the audit covered specific areas such as governance, budget monitoring, ordering, purchase card, and official fund, child protection, school vehicles, etc. Because the concerns were around the financial management of the school. So we've got assurances that the financial management in those particular areas are now sound and are working through in terms of compliance with the expected financial procedures and controls. The capital project was obviously a specific concern that was raised, and we can't go back and test that until they have a new capital project. But everything else we've confirmed from a financial management perspective has improved, and we're satisfied that we've got assurances now that appropriate controls are now in place.
Thanks, Andrew. Matthew, I would hope now, given that the school has come back under the local authority control and responsibility, that any capital project now will go through the council in regards to the process for procurement, etc., etc. So whilst when they were in the foundation phase, my understanding is they could do what they want really in regards. Well, they shouldn't do what they want. They should have followed the council's procedures, but they clearly didn't. But I would hope that given it comes back within the authority's control now, that any future capital project would go through the requisite checks and balances and controls of this authority. And I would have thought there would be a team of individuals, both internally and from education, working on those projects. Councillor Prothero.
Yes, I just wanted to agree with you, Chair, that that now the school's back under local authority control, and it's pleasing to see that we've had one audit and things are definitely on the up, and the overspend is coming down. That's really positive. So my only question really to Andrew is to the future. Are we going to continue to support the school with a review in another year's time or something? Just to make sure that everything is still on the right track. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for the question. In terms of our audit planning process, because it's a reasonable audit, it goes into our mix, our audit universe, and we probably would risk assess that on an annual basis. Probably we wouldn't be going back next year to do an audit, but we do issue what we call a controlled risk self-assessment to the school to give them an indication of how well they're performing against the requirements for sound financial management. That comes back into the audit team. We will assess that in terms of our planning process, and if we've got any concerns, then we will go back and we will do a second audit there. We've now developed a really good relationship with the head teacher, and I'm pretty confident that if he has any concerns, he will make us aware of those and get in touch with us if he's got any issues in terms of financial management. And I'm pretty confident he will complete the control risk self-assessment properly and honestly.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say, Chair, that's great, thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for supporting the school to get to this stage. It's really appreciated.
Thank you. Are there any other further questions? Are there any comments? No, go to the recommendation. I think the recommendation is we note the contents of the report and the actions taken by the internal audit team. Someone prepared to move? Thank you, Councillor Huber. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Sorry, item 10 then, the internal audit follow-up limited option.
Thank you, Chair. Me again. So when we reported our progress against the plan previously to committee, we reported a number of audit opinions, one of which was a limited opinion, which related to the tender evaluation and award within building services and the project and planned maintenance team. Members were concerned and felt that they needed further assurances from either the director or head of service to ensure that improvements were being made and action was taken against the recommendations moving forward. So as a result of the committee's recommendation, the head of housing and building services has been invited this evening to give you those assurances. And previously I've reported into committee a very brief summary of why we felt the audit could only result in a limited opinion assurance. So within this report, there's a lot more detail. There's the detail of why we felt it was limited in the first audit report, which we undertook back in September 2021, as set out in Appendix A. And then subsequently, when we followed up the audit back in 2024, that information, that action plan is set out at Appendix B, with summarised findings, not the actual findings. And there's a column on the right-hand side there, which has been completed by the service manager, the respective head of service, in terms of what action has been taken following the audit and what has been agreed in terms of implementation of the recommendations. if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll pass you to the Head of Service to provide the assurances you now require.
Thank you, Andrew. Welcome, and look forward to hearing your update.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I just say how disappointed I am to have to be in front of committee today to effectively follow up on findings that colleagues in internal audit identified some 3 years prior to the second audit. From my perspective, that isn't acceptable. Although in saying that, I would note that there had been some improvements, certainly within the development and asset team that were identified in the first report in 2021. In discussion with the audit team that undertook the 24 audit, and those discussions did identify there had been substantial improvement in the one area of the service, but not in the other. I'd also say in terms of the general report itself and the general findings, it's disappointing that there were some areas where compliance had been assured, but in other individual projects, that was not possible to identify. So the consistency is also disappointing in that, as I say, in some projects it appeared to have been followed, but not in others. Clearly, for Governance and Audit Committee and for our internal audit team, clearly what we want to have is consistent approach to procurement, that is, and potentially and particularly to our small and medium contractors that bid for our work, that there is transparency in terms of the process, and that is can be assured when we do tender for works. If I briefly take you through, if Chair's happy to take you through the findings point by point. Obviously, you've got more detailed response there, but in terms of the 1.1, which talks around that documentation, some processes being followed, some not being followed. So since the audit investigation in 2024, I've now appointed a procurement officer that sits within our asset and development team. They've been in place, I think it's 4 or 5 months. We're also about to appoint, and we're just waiting for a start date for a new service manager that will oversee the work of the project and plan team. They're due to be appointed in the next couple of weeks. We're just waiting for final references to be provided. In terms of the actions themselves, all new projects are now following the appropriate documentation, and I have oversight in relation to the work that is currently being undertaken and taken personal responsibility to ensure that that is the case. Notifications will be made and have been made to procurement unit. One point that I would make, and it probably follows on perhaps to a comment that was made earlier about how do you assure processes are being followed. Examples are few and far between this year, effectively because all of our work for that particular team will come from internal client, and clearly the financial capital position for our internal clients is difficult at the moment. And therefore most of the work that team is doing at the moment is actually for our housing team. So some of the work in relation to Welsh Housing Quality Standard, where there are, as I've mentioned, much more robust processes in place. Staff have been instructed and expectations clearly laid out by myself and the operational manager, and that will be reaffirmed then in weekly meetings with the senior project officer and service manager once that post holder is in place. In terms of 1.2, which is very much around short notice and the type of work that the project and plan team do. So the project and plan team, their bread and butter work traditionally has been schools work. So, for example, a lot of their work has been confined to summer holidays and other holidays where schools are shut, and therefore excuses, if that's the right word, that were provided related to short notice. Officers have been reminded that where there are particular issues in relation to procurement at short notice, where that's the case, then the Council's financial regulations do allow for consideration of that type of work, and that things like emergency powers or exemptions to the financial regulation should be followed if there is unrealistic timescale in terms of lead-in time for projects to be completed. The teams are meeting now more regularly with internal client teams. As I say, the property team, those meetings are a little bit more sporadic now because there's less work coming through to the internal trading team, the plan team, but there are ongoing discussions with other client departments in the council that commission our work. In terms of 1.3, these are around frameworks. Much of the work that this team does, unlike the asset and development team that deal with multi-million-pound contracts, much of the work that this team undertake is work valued at between £30,000 and £50,000. Much of it probably doesn't fall within a lot of the existing frameworks that are out there, and therefore the team will be relying on quotations, obviously, for work that is under 75,000, and we've put in place a process to ensure that, in terms of one of the later recommendations around value for money, that we are able to demonstrate that. We'll continue to work with our colleagues in Ardell in relation to procurement frameworks that are available for some of the work that we do in relation to those frameworks being suitable for us. In terms of the high action at 2.2, and I think this is the area where I say around transparency, both internally but also externally in terms of contractors, we've partly implemented that action to date. Part of the work that we have done, we've process mapped, staff have received training around documentation. Obviously there were concerns at the time that a lot of this information within this unit is very much paper-based. There are very little electronic systems in place, and therefore part of the summarised finding that you can see there, an officer was absent at the time, and the other officers were unable to assure internal audit or direct internal audit to the appropriate documentation. So there's work to be undertaken still in relation to those processes. In relation to 2.3, declaration to state with regard to personal interests, that's partly implemented. All officers, we now have assurance, all officers have had an annual return in relation to any declarations of personal interest, and we're amending our tender evaluation forms to include a statement for each tender that officers are involved with going forward. In relation to the last recommendation, 3.1, limited documentation and value for money, as I say, part of that has been implemented to date in that officers are now looking to three quotations for works under £75,000. But again, it's an area that we would look to our new service manager to work with the building operations manager to implement. We've put a January 25 date there because there has been some delay in going through the recruitment processes for the new manager. The new manager has given notice and worked his notice in his other organisation, but as I say, we're just dotting I's and crossing T's in the start date with the Vale Council. That's hopefully will give committee some assurance, certainly that we do take the report seriously. I acknowledge and hold my hands up that it is not acceptable that a report in 21 in 24 highlights the same actions or a number of actions. Myself and the operational manager for the service have taken personal responsibility to ensure that the actions are followed and will continue to do so. And if it's helpful, as I say, if it's helpful to committee, happy to come back at an appropriate time in the future to give you an update in relation to further assurance if necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike, for that comprehensive update. Are there any questions? Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Chair. So, in relation to 2.3, with personal interests of officers, has there been any use of informal channels to ensure that there's been no personal interests when contracting, when using tenders, when going through the procurement process? Has there been any form before this pro forma comes in that allows officers to make those declarations outside of the annual review?
Officers will be aware that there would be a requirement under the council's constitution that should they have any declarations of interest, that they should make those known at any appropriate time, not necessarily just at the annual assessment where we're asking somebody to fill in a form. Officers are required, all officers at all levels are required to notify of any interest in the same way as members, I guess, would be required to do so, not just necessarily through the register of members' interests. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. But has there been any use in the last 3 years of informal channels? Because as you said, there's going to be a pro forma put within the tender documents that during the tender process, officers can write in their declarations. Has there been any use, while that hasn't been in place, of informal channels to inform of declarations of interest while that hasn't been in place?
Sorry, I misinterpreted the question. Yes, informally, the panel that meets is chaired by a senior officer for the council, and the officer concerned will have raised this even though there was no formal process in place at the time. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, and thank you, Mike, for coming today to committee. And I appreciate this hasn't been a comfortable thing that you've had to talk about, and so I do appreciate you from doing that. I can see that we're trying to make some changes, and you've said that you've appointed a procurement officer. Can I ask if that procurement officer is a member of the Chartered Institute of Purchase and Supply, first of all, so that they completely understand procurement regulations? And my next question really is to do with what are you going to do next? So how are we going to make sure in the next couple of months that processes and procedures are put into place, and especially to prepare your procurement officer and anybody else whose work touches the procurements, because come February, when the new Act is initiated, you're going to need to look at covered procurements from £30,000 onwards, and there's going to be a lot of different things that they're going to need to do on top of what you've also been trying to rectify. So there's an awful lot of stuff coming in down the line. So I just wanted to know what your plans are to make sure that all of these things are going to be put in place and the checks and balances are going to be there for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. In response to your first question, I don't know if they are a member of the charter, have the charter qualification that you mentioned. Just to be clear, really, if I explain what I mean by procurement officer. It's a procurement resource. So it's much more around the administration of procurement, I guess, in terms of the processes. So it's not replacing a professional officer that with the qualifications that you would expect to see in Ardal at all. So that's providing resource and capacity to ensure that the processes that are in place in terms of the council's financial regulations and constitution are being followed. So it's probably a more of a checking resource. In terms of your second point, having gone through the Ardal training for chief officers that was provided a couple of months ago, I would agree with you that in terms of the new Procurement Act and the new processes around that, that will require much more additional training for all officers that are doing any procurement for the council. Certainly for my own service area, it has raised the question for the management team around the capacity and the resources that we have currently in-house in order to follow the Procurement Act. And that will be an area that we're considering at the moment in terms of additional resources that we will need within the officer teams to support them in delivery of the building contracts work that we do. As I say, I think it is an issue for us going forward, and it'll be an area that we will keep under constant review in relation to the resources and the capacity within the teams to be able to comply with the Procurement Act, which we will of course do.
Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Mike. And I noticed through the report the issue of resources comes up, and I'd just be interested in whether or not you have a view as to whether your resources are sufficient. And if they're not, can you just talk us through your route to discussing the need for more resources with your director and the political leadership as well? Thank you.
Yeah, it probably would be helpful if I explained in terms of development and assets. So that's the team that is responsible for WHQS, housing improvement. That work is capital. A lot of that work, majority of that work is capital, and obviously there are fees associated with the capital nature of that work, which are charged back, obviously in our case, the housing revenue account, because all of that work is activity on tenants' homes. So the resources are probably targeted. You know, the flexibility there in terms of resources. There are more resources within that envelope. The project and plan team is a trading account activity, so there's no budget. So their income is derived from the project work that they do for clients. Therefore, any increase in back office resource in terms of that trading account team would come in response by the charges that we would charge the clients for the work that we do. And it may well be that where we are asked to undertake work or to bid for work, whether that's property services or provide estimates, that we would have to take account of additional resource that would be required to fulfil that procurement role. And that may well lead to additional costs that we would charge out to clients to be able to do that. The team at the moment, as you can see from the report, it's a delivery team. They deliver the works. They are probably not, and that would be my reflection as the head of service, they are probably not well resourced in terms of a lot of the back office functions, and that's an area that, as I say, should we wish to increase that, then the knock-on effect potentially is increased costs passed back to clients.
Any other questions? Now, Andrew, I've just got a quick question, not for you, Mike. In regards to the original report, which is the 15th of September 2021, were the recommendations there incorporated within the some of the recommendations there incorporated within the 24 follow-up report? Because clearly we've been discussing quite a lot about procurement this evening in various guises. And again, on the 21 report, it says about Council continues progression towards establishing a fully functioning internal contracts register. And that was to be done by December 21. Again, information was outstanding there. The point that's just been made about training, that was picked up in 5.10.6 of the 21 report about officers to undertake training on all relevant stages of the council's procurement requirements. That was still outstanding in October 2021. So what I think like to see is that if and when Mike comes back, is all those issues that may be outstanding and affect the team in the 21 report are signed off, as well as the recommendations in the 24 report, because in a previous life, I was caught out by that. We had dealt with all the issues in one set of reports, and then they come back and say, well, what about the 2010 ones? Did you deal with those? And all of a sudden you realise you haven't. But it's just making sure that they're all picked up and that the issues dealt with in one. I don't know whether that was picked up, Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's a very fair point. In terms of a follow-up audit, we would try and make sure that all recommendations previously issued have been addressed. That's what we would look at and concentrate on moving forward, although we would cover that particular area in terms of the follow-up report. So the wording may have changed slightly. We've moved on. We've tried to update our reporting processes. So we would hopefully pick that up, but we can double-check that for you for next time. But hopefully Mike has given you some assurances that things are moving forward. What we will do as well is we will now go back and do another audit in this particular area within about 6 to 12 months because it's limited opinion and come back with an update to committee.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And the other sort of question, Mike, and I don't know whether it's a corporate question really, rather than have these small teams of procurement specialists throughout the council in regards to very specific areas, is there any appetite, for the council to rationalise it and have a procurement team to actually deal with most of the issues which are dealt with by the council? Because to have a corporate procurement team and then maybe have a team within your directorate and have a team somewhere else surely isn't value for money. And given the complexities now of the new legislation, would it be better to be looked at in one? Obviously I don't run this council and don't intend to, but I'm just wondering whether any thought have been given to that, Tom or Mike, rather than everyone look for their own, is to put a greater number together and have that efficiency.
Just to perhaps pick up on one point, clearly Ardal and the joint responsibility that Ardal provides a number of local authorities clearly is at the above £300,000 end, and therefore a lot of that efficiency, I guess, is made because of the value of those contracts. The work that we're looking at is probably more around procurement administration, perhaps more than I think the description that we talked about earlier. I would imagine that there is lots of procurement administration activity going on for most officers, most managers, anyone procuring, whether it's office stationery or whether it's, as I say, £30,000 or £50,000 building contracts. So I think there are elements of that already being undertaken within the teams themselves. Whether there would be any value in bringing that out, particularly if So, for example, in my area, there would be specialism in terms of some of the materials. If we're modernising a school toilet, the types of materials we would use would be very specific. There's the panels that we use. There are only certain fitters that are authorised to work on those things. So it would probably be very difficult to aggregate all that in. But project administration, clearly for me, there is a benefit, and that's, I suppose, when I'm looking in terms of my response to Procurement Act for housing and building services, is about whether there is an efficiency for me to bring that together in-house and have one set of learning, one set of governance, one set of arrangements rather than individuals, perhaps having a much more haphazard approach, perhaps, if I can describe it as that, to procurement.
Thanks for that. And just another question, which, because I don't know. I assume Ardell are contractors, are they? The councils contract with them to do specific areas of work for them?
So the arrangement that we've got in place with Ardell gives us access to the category managers within the procurement service. So they're all employed by Cardiff Council. So our relationship is with Cardiff Council offering that partnership, and then we get access to the various category staff who manage different types of procurement within them.
The only question I was going to get is, how do you know you're getting value for money in regards to that provision of service, and whether anyone's looked at bringing it in-house, but presumably, given the very specialised nature, it does, well, someone's done that cost benefit and the value for money. Okay. Councillor John.
Yeah, just to answer your questions there on the point of bringing things in-house, it's something that I hope I'm not speaking out of turn for the chair of the Task and Finish, that it's a question being looked at by the Task and Finish group. Hopefully we'll see what comes out of the conclusions of that.
Thank you for that, because obviously it's not necessarily the right thing to do sometimes, because it's horses for courses, but it does need to be looked at on a cost-benefit basis. Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Right. Are there any other questions? No? Any comments? No? Okay. Can I just say firstly, thank you, Mike, for being open and honest and obviously taking the responsibility for this. But the recommendation I would like to put to committee is this, that the committee notes the remedial actions that are being taken to address the internal audit recommendations of 2021-2024, and that the head of service and service manager report back on progress made against the outstanding recommendations on the 24th of March 2025. I was going to say February, but given this concern now about this new procurement legislation coming into effect in February, hopefully it'll just give you a little bit of breathing space to come back and just update us in regards to where you are on the recommendations. Hopefully, if you can come back and say they've all been done and satisfied, that would, I hope, satisfy us as a committee. And then Andrew can go in and do his review audit for that. So that's why I'm proposing to committee, subject to being getting it moved and seconded and going forward. So anyone prepared to move it? Thank you, Councillor John. Could I have a second there? Councillor Hooper, thank you. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. You can stay if you want to the bitter end. But thank you very much for your input. Item 11 then is the forward work programme. Joan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is item, the forward work programme is one that you're familiar with. As you all know, the forward work programme enables this committee to ensure it's covering its range of responsibilities as per the term of reference. So Appendix A is the updated forward work programme, and the proposed agenda for the next timetabled meeting for the 16th of December is within the covering report. But as we've mentioned earlier, that you were advised in the last meeting, although good progress is being made with the audit of the 23-24 statement of accounts, an additional meeting in November will be required to present the audited statement of accounts and annual governance statement. So a special meeting of this committee, I understand, has been scheduled now for Monday the 18th of November at 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Joan. Any questions on it? comments? The only comments I'd make is obviously within the programme itself, it's showing some items that should have come to us in September, the corporate complaints policy and the whistleblowing. No, it's not the whistleblower, it's corporate complaints. I know that's been put off. If we can establish when that's coming next, Tom, I did agree with Tony that it could be put off. So if we can agree that, make sure that's ticked in. Obviously, we've got the extraordinary or special council, special committee meeting on the 18th of November. Now that will deal with both the statement of accounts and the policy we just been discussing this evening at 7 o'clock, I'm told. So, apologies for that, because I believe the chamber's in use or there's other things going on. So apologies for that. And on the 24th of March, if we can put Mike and his team to come back to give us an update on the outstanding issues. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you. And a seconder, thank you. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Item 12, any item deemed urgent? There aren't any. There aren't any part 2 reports. So can I thank you all for your deliberations and contributions this evening, and declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.